Episode 4, Courage, Andreia. Doing what is right, even when it's hard. Before I say anything else, let me make this clear. This episode is not about bravery, as the world sells it. It's not about adrenaline. It's not about aggression. It's not about loud confidence or reckless action. This episode is about courage, real courage. The kind that doesn't get applause. The kind that doesn't trend. The kind that costs you something. The ancient word for it was Andreia, and it meant something far heavier than being bold. It meant doing what is right, even when it hurts. Why courage is misunderstood. Most men think courage looks like action, standing up, speaking out, charging forward. But the truth is far less cinematic. Courage often looks like staying silent when ego wants to speak, telling the truth when lies are safer, taking responsibility when excuses are available, walking into uncertainty without guarantees. Real courage rarely feels heroic in the moment. It feels lonely. Why this episode matters now. We live in a time where cowardice is comfortable. You can avoid responsibility and blame systems, stay quiet and avoid conflict, follow consensus and avoid judgment, distract yourself instead of deciding. Modern life rewards avoidance. That's why courage has become rare, and rarity gives it power. What this channel is about. Before we go further, let me pause here. If you're here because you're tired of motivational noise, if you're here because you want structure, clarity, and strength, if you're here because you know deep down that comfort has weakened modern men, then this channel is for you. I invite you to subscribe, not for content, for continuity. Each episode builds on the last. Courage means nothing without wisdom. Strength collapses without discipline, and none of it lasts without consistency. If this topic already resonates with you, hit the like button. It helps this message reach other men who are quietly searching for something solid. And if you know another man, a brother, a friend, a colleague who is avoiding a hard truth, share this episode with him. Not to pressure him, not to lecture him, as an invitation. Now listen closely, because courage is not what most men think it is. What courage really is. Courage is not fearlessness. Fearlessness is ignorance or arrogance. Courage is acting in the presence of fear. It is knowing the cost and paying it anyway. Andreia was never about eliminating fear. It was about refusing to let fear decide. The inner battle. Most battles today are not external. They are internal. The fear of being judged, being wrong, being alone, losing status, making the wrong decision. The modern battlefield is psychological, and courage is no longer tested by swords, but by choices. Why most men avoid courage? Because courage exposes you. It removes excuses. It removes victims. It removes distractions. Courage says, this is on you. And that responsibility is heavy. So men delay. They rationalize. They wait for the right time. And the right time never comes. Historical context. Why Andreia mattered. In the ancient world, courage was not admired for spectacle. It was admired for reliability. The courageous man was trusted, not because he was loud, but because he didn't abandon duty when things became difficult. He didn't retreat when pressure arrived. He didn't compromise principles for comfort. He could be counted on. That was courage. Courage is quiet commitment. The strongest courage is rarely seen. It happens when no one is watching, no reward is promised, no recognition is coming, and yet you choose the harder path anyway. That choice builds something inside you, and once built, it cannot be taken. The cost of a life without courage. Men who avoid courage live safely, but not solidly. They feel restless, resentful, unfulfilled, disconnected from themselves, not because life was unfair, but because they avoided hard decisions. Courage gives weight to life. Without it, everything feels shallow. What this episode will do, this episode will not hype you up. It will steady you. It will strip away false definitions of courage. Expose where fear has been making decisions for you. Reframe discomfort as a proving ground. Restore responsibility to where it belongs. And that process is uncomfortable. which means it's working. Courage does not begin with action. It begins with emotional strength, because a man who cannot regulate himself will never stand firm under pressure. That is where we begin. Emotional strength, holding the line internally. Emotional strength is the foundation of courage. Without it, courage collapses the moment resistance appears. Most men believe strength means intensity. They think strength is loud conviction, strong emotion, passionate reaction. But emotional strength is the opposite. It is stability under pressure. What emotional strength is not. Emotional strength is not suppression. Suppressing emotion stores it, and stored emotion eventually explodes. Emotional strength is containment, feeling fully without acting blindly. Why emotional weakness kills courage. A man who is emotionally fragile reacts defensively, avoids confrontation, seeks approval, fears disapproval. Fear becomes his compass, and fear never points toward what is right. The role of discomfort. Discomfort is not danger, but emotionally weak men treat it as such. They confuse anxiety with threat, uncertainty with risk, disapproval with rejection. Courage requires re-education. Discomfort is not a stop sign. It is a signal. Emotional strength is trained. No one is born emotionally strong. It is trained by sitting with discomfort instead of escaping, delaying reaction instead of exploding, allowing tension instead of numbing it. Each time you stay present under pressure, strength increases, quietly, gradually, permanently. Why modern life weakens emotional strength. Modern systems remove friction, instant relief, instant validation, instant distraction, but strength grows through resistance. When resistance disappears, so does resilience, the courage to feel without fleeing. Courage begins when you stop running from uncomfortable emotions. Fear, doubt, tension, uncertainty. They are not enemies. They are tests. And emotional strength is passing those tests without collapsing. Self-command before self-confidence. Confidence is unstable without control. Emotional strength creates self-command, and self-command outlasts confidence, because confidence rises and falls. Command remains. The man who can hold his ground internally, a man who can remain calm when challenged, stay grounded when criticized, hold silence when provoked, has already won half the battle, because pressure reveals who is governed internally and who is not. Courage does not start when you speak. It starts when you don't collapse internally. Emotional strength is the silent prerequisite. Without it, courage is theater. With it, courage becomes inevitable. Moral backbone, standing for what is right when it costs you. Courage without a moral backbone is not courage at all. It is impulse. It is ego. It is noise masquerading as strength. True courage does not come from adrenaline. It comes from principle, and principle is tested only when it becomes inconvenient. What moral backbone really is. A moral backbone is the ability to hold a position without external support. It is standing firm. When you lose approval, when you risk reputation, when silence would be easier, when compromise would be rewarded. Most men believe they have principles until those principles demand payment. That payment is discomfort, and this is where courage separates men. Why principles collapse under pressure. Principles collapse when they're borrowed. Many men inherit beliefs without examining them. They repeat values they've never tested. And when pressure arrives, borrowed values evaporate. A moral backbone is not inherited. It is earned through friction. You discover what you truly believe only when acting on it costs you something real. The difference between opinion and principle. An opinion changes with mood. A principle does not. An opinion bends under pressure. A principle holds. Most men defend opinions loudly, but abandon principles quietly. Courage demands the opposite. Speak less. Stand more. Historical context. Why backbone built trust. In the ancient world, a man's word mattered only as much as his consistency. Leaders were not trusted because they were popular, but because they were predictable in their ethics. When pressure arrived, they did not change character. They did not shift values to fit the crowd. rewrite standards to protect comfort, blame others to escape responsibility. They absorb consequence willingly. That reliability was courage. Why modern life erodes moral backbone. Modern systems reward flexibility of values. You are encouraged to adapt beliefs to trends, avoid positions that cause friction, stay neutral to avoid judgment. Neutrality feels safe. But neutrality in moments that demand decision is not wisdom. It is avoidance. And avoidance weakens the spine. The courage to disappoint. One of the hardest lessons I learned was this. You cannot live with integrity and please everyone. Courage requires the willingness to disappoint. People you respect. People you care about. People whose approval once mattered. That disappointment is not cruelty. It is honesty. And honesty is a foundation of moral strength. Why silence is often moral cowardice. There is a difference between restraint and silence motivated by fear. Wisdom chooses silence strategically. Cowardice chooses silence defensively. A moral backbone speaks when silence protects comfort at the expense of truth. Not loudly, not emotionally, but clearly. Courage is not shouting truth. It is refusing to lie. Even quietly. Responsibility as a moral act. Responsibility is the visible proof of backbone. Blame is easy. Excuses are plentiful. Responsibility is rare. Taking responsibility means saying, "This stops with me." Even when you didn't cause the problem entirely. Others contributed. Circumstances were unfair. Courage does not argue fairness. It argues ownership. The cost of living without backbone. Men without moral backbone feel unstable. They second-guess themselves constantly. Fear being exposed. Shift positions depending on audience. Feel resentment towards stronger men. Not because life is hard, but because they cannot trust themselves. Courage restores self-trust. Why courage and backbone are inseparable. Without backbone, courage becomes recklessness. Without courage, backbone becomes fantasy. They require each other. Courage activates principle. Principle guides courage. Together, they create a man who can be relied upon. The moment that defines backbone. There is always a moment. A conversation you'd rather avoid. A truth that risks backlash. A decision that isolates you. That moment asks one question. Who decides, fear or principle? The answer shapes your identity. The internal shift. Once you choose principle over comfort, something changes. You stand differently. You speak less, but more clearly. You stop negotiating with yourself. That internal alignment is power. And power built on principle does not crumble. Courage is not loud. It does not seek attention. It does not demand recognition. It stands quietly, firmly when pressure says bend. A moral backbone is courage made permanent. Without it, strength collapses. With it, character becomes unmovable. The willingness to face discomfort, fear, or loss. Choosing the hard path when the easy one is available. Courage becomes real the moment it starts to cost you something. Before that, it's just theory. Anyone can talk about bravery when nothing is at stake. Anyone can imagine themselves strong in hypothetical situations. But Andreia, the courage the Stoics respected, was not proven in imagination. It was proven in discomfort, in fear, in uncertainty, in loss. This is where most men stop. Why discomfort is the gatekeeper of courage. Discomfort is the final barrier. Not danger, not opposition, not difficulty. Discomfort, the unease in your chest, the tension in your body, the internal resistance that says, "Don't do this." Modern men are trained to avoid discomfort at all costs. We live in a world engineered for relief. Instant answers, instant entertainment, instant reassurance. Discomfort is treated like a malfunction instead of a signal. But courage begins exactly where relief ends. If you cannot tolerate discomfort, you cannot act courageously. Because courage always requires you to stay present when your nervous system demands escape. Fear is not the enemy. Fear is not your enemy. Fear is information. It tells you something matters. Something is uncertain. Something could be lost. Fear becomes destructive only when it decides for you. Courage does not eliminate fear. It overrides it. A courageous man feels fear fully and still moves. That movement rewires something fundamental: the internal dialogue of cowardice. Cowardice rarely sounds dramatic. It sounds reasonable. It says, "This isn't the right time. Let things calm down. It's not worth the trouble. Why create problems?" Cowardice does not shout. It negotiates. And negotiation is how courage dies quietly. Loss, the price courage demands. Every act of courage risks loss. You may lose approval, comfort, status, security, certainty. That is not a flaw in courage. That is the price of integrity. Men who refuse to risk loss eventually lose something far worse: respect for themselves. And self-respect, once eroded, is difficult to rebuild. Historical context. Why courage meant endurance. In the ancient world, courage was admired not for spectacle, but for endurance. The courageous man was not the one who charged recklessly. He was the one who held his ground. During long sieges, through extended hardship, under prolonged uncertainty, he did not flee when conditions worsened. He did not abandon duty when fear intensified. He stayed. And staying is harder than charging. Why most men avoid hard choices. Hard choices expose you. Once you act courageously, you can no longer claim ignorance. You can no longer hide behind confusion. You become accountable for the outcome. Avoidance preserves plausible deniability. Courage removes it. That is why many men hesitate. Not because they are incapable, but because they sense the weight of responsibility that follows action. Discomfort as a training ground. Discomfort is not a punishment. It is training. Each time you choose to stay present instead of escaping, your tolerance increases. Your fear threshold rises. Your confidence stabilizes. This is not motivational theory. It is neurological adaptation. The nervous system learns from exposure, not avoidance. The moment you decide to stay, there is always a moment. You feel fear. You feel resistance. You feel the urge to withdraw. And then you decide, I will stay. That decision is small, but it changes you. Repeated often enough, it creates courage as a default response. The difference between courage and self-destruction. Let's be precise. Courage is not reckless suffering. It is intentional exposure. You do not seek pain. You accept it when it is required by principle. You do not glorify loss. You accept it when truth demands it. This distinction matters. Courage serves purpose. Self-destruction serves ego. Why comfort creates fragility. Men who avoid discomfort become fragile. They appear stable until pressure arrives. Then they freeze, collapse, retreat. Comfort removes resilience. Courage restores it. The courage to be seen. One of the hardest forms of courage is visibility. Being seen, taking a position, making a decision, owning a mistake. Visibility invites judgment. Avoiding it feels safe. But safety erodes identity. Courage accepts visibility and its consequences. When courage feels lonely. Courage is often lonely, not because others are against you, but because few are willing to join you. This loneliness is not punishment. It is confirmation. You are walking a path most avoid. The internal shift after facing fear. Once you face fear directly, something irreversible happens. Fear loses its authority. It may still appear, but it no longer commands. That is power, not domination of others. Domination of self. The man who can face loss. A man who can face loss calmly becomes unshakable. He is not reckless. He is not careless. But he is not trapped, because he knows he can survive discomfort. And that knowledge changes every decision he makes. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the willingness to move with fear present. It is choosing integrity over comfort, principle over relief, action over avoidance. If you can face discomfort, fear, or loss without retreating, you become dangerous to mediocrity and indispensable to yourself. Modern application of courage. Doing what is right when there is no applause. Courage is not proven in history books. It is proven today in ordinary moments under ordinary pressure with ordinary consequences. Modern courage does not look like battlefields or banners. It looks like conversations you don't want to have, decisions you'd rather postpone, responsibilities you could easily explain away. This is where Andreia lives now, not in spectacle, in conduct. Speak truth when it's uncomfortable. Let me start with the most avoided form of courage in modern life. Truth, not brutal honesty, not performance, not provocation. Truth spoken calmly, clearly, and without malice, even when it creates friction. Most men stay silent not because they lack intelligence, but because they fear consequences. Being misunderstood, being judged, being labeled, being isolated. So they soften truth until it becomes harmless, or they delay it until it becomes irrelevant. That is not wisdom. That is avoidance. Courage speaks when silence protects comfort at the expense of clarity. Not loudly, not aggressively, but decisively. Why truth feels dangerous. Truth threatens stability. Not real stability, but false equilibrium. When you speak truth, you disturb patterns, dynamics that benefit from silence, systems that rely on compliance, relationships built on avoidance. That disturbance creates discomfort. And courage means tolerating that discomfort without retreating. Truth is not about winning. Courageous truth is not about victory. It is about alignment. You speak truth because living in contradiction erodes you internally. You speak truth because silence creates resentment. You speak truth because clarity is healthier than tension, even when it costs you, especially then. Take responsibility instead of blaming. Blame is the most socially acceptable form of cowardice. It feels justified. It feels intelligent. It feels relieving. And it destroys courage completely. Taking responsibility is uncomfortable because it removes escape routes. It says, "This is mine to address." Even when others contributed, circumstances were unfair. Outcomes were unpredictable. Responsibility does not argue fairness. It claims agency. And agency is courage in action. Why men resist responsibility? Because responsibility is heavy. Once you accept it, you can no longer hide behind excuses, systems, other people, circumstances. Responsibility places you at the center, and the center is exposed. Courage accepts that exposure. Responsibility creates power. Here's the paradox most men miss. Responsibility feels burdensome at first, but it creates freedom. Once you accept ownership, you stop waiting for permission. You stop negotiating with excuses. You stop resenting others. You regain control, and control is strength. Face uncertainty without paralysis. Uncertainty is unavoidable. There will always be incomplete information, conflicting advice, unknown outcomes. The coward waits for certainty. The courageous man moves with clarity, not certainty. He understands that waiting for perfect conditions is another form of avoidance. Courage does not guarantee success. It guarantees movement. Why uncertainty freezes men? Uncertainty triggers fear of error. Men think, what if I'm wrong? What if this fails? What if I regret this? These questions feel prudent, but when they prevent action entirely, they become paralysis. Courage accepts the possibility of error and acts anyway, because inaction has consequences too. Decision is better than drift. Drift feels safe. No commitment, no responsibility, no exposure. But drift slowly erodes self-respect. Courage chooses direction, even imperfect direction, over stagnation. A wrong decision can be corrected. Indecision becomes identity. Courage in daily life. Modern courage looks like saying no when people expect yes, saying yes when fear demands no, ending what no longer aligns, beginning before confidence arrives, owning mistakes without self-destruction. None of this is dramatic. All of it is decisive. Why courage is rare now? Because modern systems reward comfort, avoid friction, avoid responsibility, avoid confrontation, avoid discomfort. But a life built on avoidance becomes hollow. Courage restores weight to life. The internal consequence of courage. Once you act courageously enough times, something changes internally. You trust yourself. Not because you always succeed, but because you know you won't abandon yourself when things get hard. That trust is invaluable. Why courage must be practiced daily. Courage is not a one-time event. It is a habit. If you don't practice it, fear regains ground. Avoidance feels reasonable again. Comfort becomes seductive. Daily courage keeps the edge sharp. Andreia as a way of life. Andreia is not bravado. It is emotional steadiness, moral clarity, willingness to face cost. It is doing what is right, not because it feels good, but because it is right, even when no one agrees, no one notices, no one rewards you, especially then. Courage is not loud. It does not announce itself. It does not demand recognition. It simply acts when fear or prefer delays, silence, or retreat. If you can speak truth when it's uncomfortable, take responsibility when blame is easier, and face uncertainty without paralysis, then you're living Andreia. And that kind of courage cannot be taken from you. Courage is a decision you make when no one is watching. We've reached the end of this episode, but not the end of the work. If there's one thing I want you to carry with you after this chapter, it's this. Courage is not an emotion. It is a decision made quietly, repeated daily, often without witnesses. Throughout this episode, we've stripped courage down to its essentials. Not the version sold to you as spectacle. Not the version that looks good on a screen, but the version that actually builds a man from the inside out. Andreia is not loud. It does not posture. It does not seek applause. It shows up when comfort says stop, when fear says wait, when loss says retreat, and it says move anyway, the thread that connects everything. Look back at what we covered. Emotional strength, moral backbone, the willingness to face discomfort, fear, or loss, the daily application of truth, responsibility, and decisive action. These are not separate ideas. They are one structure. Without emotional strength, courage collapses under pressure. Without a moral backbone, courage becomes reckless. Without the willingness to face loss, courage never leaves theory. Without daily application, courage fades back into comfort. Andreia is the bridge between who you are and who you claim to be. It is integrity in motion. Why courage feels heavy. Courage feels heavy because it removes excuses. Once you act courageously, you can no longer tell yourself, I didn't know. I had no choice. It wasn't my responsibility. The timing wasn't right. Courage places the weight of authorship back in your hands. And that weight is uncomfortable at first, but it is also grounding. Men who live without courage feel light in the wrong way, unanchored, restless, always searching for something to compensate for what they avoid. Courage gives weight to life, and weight gives meaning. The cost of a life without courage. I've seen what happens to men who avoid courage long enough. They don't necessarily fail dramatically. They drift. They become careful in the wrong places, quiet when they should speak, compliant when they should resist, passive when they should decide. And over time, they lose something difficult to name, but impossible to ignore. They lose self-respect. No amount of comfort replaces that. Courage and self-trust. Here's the quiet reward courage gives you. You begin to trust yourself. Not because life becomes easier. Not because outcomes are guaranteed. But because you know this. When things get hard, you won't abandon yourself. That knowledge changes how you stand, how you speak, how you decide. It creates an internal stability no one can take from you. Why courage must be practiced daily. Courage is not something you store. It's something you use. If you don't practice it, fear slowly retakes ground. Comfort becomes persuasive again. Avoidance starts to sound reasonable. That's why courage must be exercised in small ways. Saying the thing you'd rather avoid. Taking responsibility without being asked. Making a decision before certainty arrives. Ending what no longer aligns. Beginning before confidence appears. Small acts keep the edge sharp. Andreia in modern times. Today, courage rarely looks dramatic. It looks like telling the truth without cruelty, choosing responsibility over blame, acting without perfect information, standing alone when consensus feels safer. This is not weakness. This is discipline. and discipline compounds. The quiet standard. I don't want you leaving this episode thinking about courage as an identity. I want you thinking about it as a standard that asks, again and again, what is the right action here? What is fear trying to avoid? What would integrity demand? Even if it costs me, answering those questions honestly is courage in its purest form. Final reflection. Before we close, take a moment, not to feel motivated, not to feel inspired, but to be honest. Ask yourself, where have I been avoiding a hard decision? Where has comfort been making choices for me? What truth have I delayed because it feels inconvenient? You don't need to answer all of them today, but you need to answer one and act on it. If this episode resonated with you, if it steadied you rather than hyped you, if it gave language to something you already felt, I invite you to subscribe to this channel, not for motivation, for structure, for continuity. Each episode builds a disciplined framework for living with clarity and strength in modern times. If courage still matters to you, hit the like button. It helps this message reach other men who are quietly searching for something solid. And if you know another man who is standing at the edge of a difficult decision, who needs courage, not comfort, share this episode with him. Not as advice, as an invitation. Courage is not about being fearless. It is about being faithful to what is right, even when it's hard, even when it costs you, even when no one is watching. That is Andreia. And once you live it, you never forget who you are. Until the next episode, stand firm,